What if you woke up tomorrow, and your life was gone? Not stolen. Not destroyed. Just replaced. Your body is there. Your hands, your reflection in the mirror, all you. But everything around you belongs to someone else. A house you've never seen. A family calling your name. A job you don't remember applying for. A past you can't find in your memory no matter how deep you dig. What would you do? 7 people found out the hard way. 7 ordinary men and women who closed their eyes in one life and opened them in another. Some say it was a medical phenomenon. Others call it a spiritual rupture, a glitch in the thread of a person's existence. A few of them never found their way back. I'm your host. You're listening to The Scary Collector. And tonight, we go somewhere that will make you afraid to fall asleep. Stay with me. Candle Hash Story 1. The Wrong House. The account of Marcus Webb, Tulsa, Oklahoma, 2019. Marcus Webb was 34 years old when it happened. He was, by all accounts, a perfectly unremarkable man. He worked as a logistics coordinator for a mid-sized freight company in Tulsa, Oklahoma. He drove a blue Honda Accord with a crack in the rear bumper. He had an apartment on the east side of town, a gym membership he barely used, and a cat named Gerald. He was not the kind of man things happened to. On the night of September 14, 2019, Marcus went to sleep at his usual time, somewhere around 11 o'clock. He had eaten leftover pasta. He had watched 30 minutes of a documentary about ocean life. He had fed Gerald, brushed his teeth, and set his alarm for 6:45 a.m. Normal. Completely, boringly normal. He woke up at 6:42 a.m., 3 minutes before the alarm was supposed to ring. The ceiling above him was wrong. Now, this might sound like a small thing. Ceilings look alike, after all, white, flat, mostly featureless. But Marcus had stared at the ceiling of his apartment bedroom for 3 years. He knew its exact shade of off-white. He knew the small water stain near the window that looked vaguely like a dog. He knew the way the morning light hit the popcorn texture and turned it faintly golden. This ceiling was smooth. Perfectly smooth. And it was higher than it should have been. Maybe by 6 or 8 inches. Just enough to be wrong. Marcus lay there for a moment. He assumed he was still dreaming. Or disoriented. He'd had a few drinks the week before and felt similarly foggy. So he blinked, rubbed his eyes, and waited for reality to reassemble itself. It didn't. He sat up. The room was large. Larger than his bedroom by at least double. There was a king-sized bed beneath him. He had a full-sized at home. The sheets were dark gray, high thread count, expensive feeling. To his left was a nightstand he'd never seen before, made of dark walnut wood. On it sat an alarm clock, not the kind you plug in, the kind that runs on batteries, and a glass of water with a small ring of condensation beneath it. Someone had placed that water there. Recently. The condensation was fresh. To his right, and this is the part that Marcus said later made his stomach drop entirely, to his right was a woman. Sleeping. Breathing slowly. Dark hair fanned out across a pillow. He did not know her. He said later, and he repeated this in every account he gave, that his first instinct was not panic. It was confusion so total, so complete, that it bypassed panic entirely and landed somewhere closer to awe. Like standing at the edge of a canyon for the first time and not being able to process the scale. He sat there. He stared at her. She was, perhaps, in her early 30s. She had long eyelashes and a small scar above her left eyebrow. She wore a gray t-shirt. She looked peaceful. She looked like someone who absolutely believed she was sleeping next to her husband. Marcus very carefully climbed out of the bed. His feet touched carpet. Thick, plush carpet, dark charcoal in color. He was wearing boxers he didn't recognize. Dark blue. There was a small MW monogram on the waistband. His initials. He walked to the bedroom door. It opened into a hallway. The hallway was wide, with framed photos lining the walls. He moved to the nearest one and looked at it in the thin morning light. It was him, standing in front of a mountain, smiling, his arm around the woman from the bed. He went to the next photo. Him again, younger, maybe late 20s, wearing a graduation gown. Next to him stood an older man and woman, a couple who might have been his parents, except that Marcus's parents had both died before he turned 20. His mother when he was 14, his father when he was 19. He had no family photos. He had almost no photos at all. He moved down the hallway. The house opened up into a living room. Large windows looking out onto a tree-lined residential street he'd never been on. Clean, suburban, quiet in the early morning. An expensive-looking couch. A bookshelf. A coffee table with a TV remote and a magazine, Architectural Digest, from the current month. On the coffee table, a set of keys. He picked them up. There was a Honda key fob, but the car on the keychain was black. His car was blue. There was a house key, and there was a small round disc, a keychain, engraved with the words, "For Marcus, home is wherever you are." He put the keys down very carefully, like they were fragile. Then he found his phone. It was on the kitchen counter, plugged in, charging. He recognized the case, black, rubberized, a small crack in the upper left corner. That was his case. He was certain of it. He unlocked it with his thumbprint. The home screen was wrong. Different apps, different layout. A wallpaper photo of him and the woman from the bedroom, laughing, somewhere tropical, sunset behind them. But his thumbprint had opened it. He went to his contacts. Different people. He scrolled through, some names he recognized, some he didn't, but the proportions were off. He knew maybe 40% of the names listed. The other 60% were strangers. He called the number listed under Mom. A woman answered on the third ring. Groggy. It was early. She said, "Marcus? What's wrong? Honey? It's not even 7. He said nothing. He stood in the kitchen of a house he didn't know and listened to the voice of a woman he had never spoken to, who called him by his name, who sounded worried about him in the easy, intimate way of someone who had known him for 34 years. He hung up. He went to the bathroom. He looked in the mirror. His face. His exact face. Same eyes, same jaw, same scar on his chin from a bike accident at age 12. He pressed his fingers to his cheek. He pinched his arm. He turned the cold faucet on and held his hand under it until the cold became uncomfortable. He was awake. Behind him in the mirror, he could see the bathroom, large, tiled, a double vanity. 2 toothbrushes. 2 sets of toiletries. A medicine cabinet. He opened it. Prescriptions. Several of them. His name, Marcus Webb, on each label. Medications he'd never been prescribed. A blood pressure drug. An anti-anxiety medication. A vitamin protocol. He closed the cabinet. The woman's name, he eventually discovered, was Adrienne Webb. They had been married, according to the documents he found in the Home Office, for 6 years. They lived at 4812 Larchmont Drive in a suburb of Nashville, Tennessee. Marcus Webb had never lived in Nashville. He had never been married. He did not own a house. He did not have high blood pressure or anxiety, as far as he knew. And yet every single piece of paper in that office, the mortgage, the tax returns, the car registration, the couple's shared bank account with a balance that made his eyes water, bore his name, his social security number, and an address he had never given anyone. When Adrienne came downstairs at 7:30 and found him sitting at the kitchen table, pale and silent, she immediately asked what was wrong. He looked at her. He said, "I don't know how to explain this to you." She sat down across from him. He told her, haltingly, brokenly, everything. About his apartment in Tulsa. His cat Gerald. His job. His blue car with the cracked bumper. His life. She listened to all of it. Then she reached across the table and put her hand on his and said, very quietly, very carefully, "Marcus, honey, you had that same nightmare again, didn't you?" He stared at her. She said, "The one where you have a different life. Where you're alone in an apartment somewhere. You've had it off and on for 2 years. Remember? Dr. Patel said it might be stress-related." He did not remember. Because he was not the Marcus Webb she knew. Or was he? This is where the story of Marcus Webb becomes something that no psychologist, no neurologist, and no philosopher has been able to cleanly resolve. Over the following weeks, Marcus lived in that Nashville house. He met the people in his new contacts. He learned his way around the neighborhood. He found photographs of himself, of a Marcus, at every age, at Christmases and birthdays and vacations he could not remember but that were documented in vivid, undeniable detail. He went to see Dr. Patel. He told the doctor everything. The doctor gently explained that dissociative episodes, particularly those combined with vivid alternate reality dreaming, were not uncommon in patients with certain anxiety profiles. Marcus accepted the explanation. What else could he do? But here's what he told a Reddit user who tracked him down 3 years later, in a thread about unexplained experiences. "I still dream about Gerald. Every week, sometimes more. I dream I'm back in my Tulsa apartment. The crack in the bumper. The gym membership card I kept in my glove box. Things I can describe in perfect detail that I have no reason to know if they were never real. One night, about 4 months after I woke up in Nashville, I found a photo in the back of an old showbox in the closet. It was of me, the me from before, standing in front of an apartment building. I'd never seen the photo before. Adrienne said she'd never seen it either and didn't know how it got there. I threw it away. I don't talk about this anymore." No one knows what happened to Marcus Webb. But somewhere in Tulsa, Oklahoma, there is reportedly a blue Honda Accord registered to a person named Marcus Webb that was found abandoned in a parking lot in September of 2019. The cat Gerald was eventually taken in by a neighbor. The neighbor said the cat acted strange for months. Like it was waiting for someone to come back. Candle # TWO. The mother the account of Lena Hartwell, Portland, Oregon, 2017. There is a particular horror that belongs only to parents. It is the horror of a child in danger. Lena Hartwell was 29 years old, unmarried, and, on the night of March 3, 2017, childless. She worked as a graphic designer for a small firm in Portland. She lived alone in a studio apartment, kept plants she was mildly neglectful of, and had recently ended a 2-year relationship. She was rebuilding, as people do. She was okay. Not happy, not unhappy, just moving. She went to sleep at midnight with her laptop open on the bed beside her. She woke up to a child crying. The sound was coming from the next room. Except her studio apartment had no next room. She was lying in a queen-sized bed in a darkened room. The crying continued, a young child, maybe 2 or 3 years old, rhythmic and escalating. The kind of crying that follows a nightmare. And Lena Hartwell, a woman with no children, no siblings young enough to matter, no experience with toddlers beyond the occasional interaction with co-workers' kids, swung her legs out of bed, stood up, and walked toward the sound. She said afterward, "I didn't think. I just went." Like my body knew where to go before my brain caught up. She crossed a small hallway and opened a door. A child's room. Soft blue walls, glow-in-the-dark stars on the ceiling, a small bed shaped like a racing car. And in it, sitting upright, tear-streaked and frightened, was a little boy, maybe 2.5. Dark curly hair, enormous brown eyes. He looked at her and said, "Mama." She picked him up. She said she didn't decide to. Her arms simply went around him and he clung to her, and she sat down in the little rocking chair by the window and held him and rocked him while he sobbed himself back to sleep. And she said, "It felt like mine. He felt like mine. Like something in my body recognized him in a way my brain couldn't." When she put him back in his bed and returned to the bedroom, she stood in the dark trying to understand where she was. The room had the quiet, particular intimacy of her space, products she recognized, a book on the nightstand she had been reading, a scarf on the hook behind the door that she owned. But the room was double the size of her studio. And through the window was not the view she knew, the street with the Italian restaurant and the yellow awning, but a quiet cul-de-sac with large oak trees, silvered by moonlight. She checked her phone. Same phone. Same lock screen photo, a photo she had taken herself, of a foggy morning in the Oregon hills. But there were texts she hadn't sent, from people she didn't know. A calendar full of appointments, pediatric in, preschool pickup, park playdate Thursday. Under emergency contacts was a name she didn't recognize, listed as Daniel, husband. She found the wedding photo on the dresser. Herself, laughing in a white dress. A man beside her, tall, dark-haired, smiling like someone who had just won something important. She didn't know his face, not even slightly. And yet when she opened the dresser drawer, her clothes were there. Her actual clothes, the striped sweater she'd bought at a thrift store in college. The jeans with the frayed left hem. A jacket she'd thought she'd lost 2 years ago. All of it folded neatly in a drawer in a house she'd never been to. She went to the kitchen and sat at the table and tried to think. The child's name, she found from papers on the counter, was Oliver. He was 2 years old, 3 months. She found a birthday card, his last birthday, signed with "All my love, Mama." She recognized her own handwriting. When the man, Daniel, came home the following evening from what appeared to be a business trip, he found her sitting on the couch in a state he described as very quiet, very still, the way she gets when something's wrong. He said, "Hey, you okay?" And Lena Hartwell, who had never met this man before in her life, looked at the face of the person who was apparently her husband and said, "I don't know who you are." What followed was, by all accounts, harrowing for both of them. Daniel thought she was joking. Then he thought she was ill. Then, when she described her life, her real life, the studio apartment, the design firm, the broken relationship, the solo evenings with her plants, he was terrified. He took her to the hospital. The doctors ran every test they could think of. Brain scan, blood work, cognitive assessments. She passed everything. There was no tumor, no stroke, no chemical imbalance they could identify. Her cognitive function was sharp. Her memory, when it came to her previous life, was flawless. She could describe her old apartment in specific detail. Her design portfolio, the name of every plant she'd owned, and which ones she'd let die. But she also remembered Oliver. Not from before, she had no memories of his birth, or of being pregnant, or of meeting Daniel. But after one day in that house, one day of caring for a toddler while simultaneously being convinced she had no idea how to care for a toddler, something had already begun to set. She knew his routine. She knew he liked his toast cut in triangles, not squares. She knew the specific song that calmed him at nap time. She knew, she said, Like knowing how to ride a bike. You don't think about it, you just do it. The diagnosis, ultimately, was dissociative amnesia, possibly triggered by stress. The breakdown of a long-term relationship. The anxiety of approaching 30. The unconscious desire for connection. The psychiatrist told her that people's minds sometimes construct entirely different selves as a form of escape, and that what she was experiencing as a previous life was likely an elaborate, convincing fabrication. Lena didn't believe it, but she stayed. She told the Reddit thread, the same one Marcus Webb eventually found, 9 months later. I stayed because of Oliver. I don't know how to say it any other way. Whatever happened to me, wherever I came from, that little boy is real, and he called me Mama, and I cannot leave him. But I think about my old apartment every day. I look up the street address sometimes, on maps. I look at the street view. The Italian restaurant with the yellow awning is still there. I've driven past it once. I sat outside in the car for 20 minutes. The plants are dead. I can see them in the window. Brown and collapsed. Nobody watered them. I don't know what that means. I don't know if it means anything at all. I just know I couldn't go in. Lena Hartwell, as far as anyone can determine, is still living in Portland. Still married to Daniel. Still raising Oliver, who is now a healthy, vivid, loud little boy of 8 years old who adores her completely. She never found out what happened to the other version of herself. The one without a child. The one with the dying plants and the broken relationship and the life that was going, quietly, nowhere. Sometimes she wonders if that version of her is somewhere right now, sitting up in bed in a house she doesn't recognize, hearing a child call for her from down the hall. And going. Candle Story 3, The Dead Man's Name, The Account of Thomas Rourke, Chicago, Illinois, 2021. Thomas Rourke woke up at 4:48 in the morning. He knew the exact time because the microwave clock in the kitchen was visible from where he lay, its green digits the only light in the room. He was on a couch. An unfamiliar couch, in an unfamiliar apartment, in what would turn out to be an unfamiliar city. He was 41. A mechanical engineer from Cleveland who had, his night before, been at his kitchen table eating cereal and watching a YouTube video about carburetor restoration. He'd gone to bed at 10. He'd fallen asleep easily, as he usually did. He was not a man prone to drama. He was not a man prone to much of anything, if he was being honest. He was methodical, precise, and deeply unimaginative, and he would tell you so himself without embarrassment. So when he woke up on the wrong couch, he did not panic. He catalogued. Couch, dark fabric, worn at the armrests. Small apartment, he could see most of it from where he lay. Kitchen to the left, bathroom door ahead, what appeared to be a bedroom behind him. Chicago traffic noise from outside, a particular sound he recognized from a conference he'd attended years ago. He was wearing clothes. Work clothes, a blue button-down, dark trousers. Clothes he did not own. His shoes were on. That struck him as odd. He sat up and found a wallet on the cushion beside him. He opened it. The driver's license inside showed his face. His exact face. Same strong nose, same heavy brow, same short brown hair going gray at the temples. The name on the license was not Thomas Rourke. It said, David Ellman. Address, 1140 North Clark Street, Chicago, Illinois. Date of birth, the same as Thomas Rourke's. To the exact day. He sat with that for a long moment. Then he checked the other cards in the wallet. Credit cards, David Ellman. A library card. A gym membership. A folded piece of paper with a phone number and the words, "Call me," written on it in handwriting he didn't recognize. He got up and looked around the apartment. It was sparse. A bachelor's space, lived in but not decorated. A few dishes in the drying rack. A stack of books on the floor, engineering texts, interestingly. A laptop on the kitchen table, closed. A corkboard on the wall with papers pinned to it. Work schedules, it looked like, from some kind of manufacturing facility. On the corkboard, one photograph. A man, his face, his precise face, standing beside an older woman. His mother? He didn't know. His own mother had died of cancer when he was 36. This woman looked healthy, late 60s, smiling. He tried the laptop. It wasn't password locked. The desktop showed a name in the user icon in the top right corner, David Ellman. The browser history was mundane. News, sports scores, a few engineering forums. An email account, davidellman47@gmail, filled with the ordinary churn of a person's life. Newsletters, work correspondence, an email thread with a woman who signed herself Sophie, and whose messages ranged in warmth from friendly to tender. Thomas, David, whoever he was, read those emails for a long time. Sophie, it appeared, was someone David Ellman had been seeing for about 4 months. The last email from her was 2 days ago. It said, "I had so much fun on Saturday. You're unexpectedly easy to talk to, you know. Hope the work thing this week isn't too horrible. See you Friday." He thought about replying. He didn't. Instead, he went through the apartment looking for any piece of information that would explain what had happened. A name. A connection. Some link between Thomas Rourke and David Ellman. He found it in the bedroom, in a showbox under the bed. Inside the showbox was a small collection of objects. A class ring from a high school in Cleveland. His high school, he recognized the crest immediately. A baseball card he recognized, not because it was valuable, but because he'd owned one as a child, the same player, the same year. A postcard from Niagara Falls signed in handwriting that matched his own. And a newspaper clipping. The clipping was from the Cleveland Plain Dealer, dated 8 years earlier. It was an obituary. The obituary was for a Thomas Rourke, aged 33, of Cleveland, Ohio. It described him as a mechanical engineer, a dedicated son, an avid restorer of vintage motorcycles. It said he had died in a car accident. Thomas Rourke sat down on the floor of the bedroom. He sat there for a very long time. Later, much later, he tried to find records of this other Thomas Rourke, the one who had apparently died at 33. He found very little. A death record. The obituary. Nothing else. He did not find any record of a David Ellman before approximately 8 years ago. David Ellman's life appeared to simply start. A driver's license issued 8 years ago. A bank account opened 8 years ago. A lease agreement from 8 years ago. Before that? Nothing. No school records. No childhood medical history. No digital footprint. As if someone had created a person from scratch. Or as if a person had stepped into a life already waiting for them. Thomas Rourke, David Ellman, told this story once, in full, to a paranormal podcast 2 years after the event. He spoke calmly and precisely, the way engineers do. He said, "I have 2 theories. The first is that I had some kind of breakdown and constructed an elaborate false memory of a previous life as a coping mechanism. I hold this theory at roughly 30% probability. The second theory is that something happened, I don't have a word for it, and I resist words like supernatural. Something happened that relocated me. That the version of me who died in a car accident at 33 was given a second chance in a different configuration. A different name, a different city, but the same skills, the same mind, the same essential selfhood. I hold this at 70%. The showbox bothers me most. Why would I have hid those objects from my old life if I didn't know, on some level, what I was? Why would I have kept evidence of Thomas Rourke hidden under the bed of David Ellman? I don't have an answer. I'm living David Ellman's life now. I'm reasonably happy. Sophie and I are serious. I still can't watch YouTube videos about carburetor restoration. I can't explain why. I just can't. David Ellman, formerly Thomas Rourke, lives in Chicago. He recently got engaged to Sophie. He has never returned to Cleveland. Candle Story 4, The Sister, the account of Priya Nair, London, England, 2020. Some displacements are not measured in miles. Some are measured in the distance between one version of a life and another. Priya Nair was 27 years old, living in East London, working as a junior solicitor at a corporate law firm. She was bright, driven, occasionally miserable, and acutely aware that the misery was largely self-imposed. She worked 70-hour weeks. She had let most of her friendships atrophy. She called her parents less than she should. She had a sister, Mira, 3 years younger, with whom she was not speaking. A fight, 2 years earlier, over something that had started small and calcified into something neither of them could quite remember the original shape of anymore. On the morning of February 19, 2020, Priya woke up in her flat in Bethnal Green. Except it wasn't her flat. It was bigger, warmer, filled with the smell of coffee and something baking. Sunlight coming through curtains she didn't own. She sat up. She was in a bedroom she'd never seen, wearing pajamas that were hers but shouldn't have been here. Through the window she could see a different street. North London, she'd guess. The architecture was different, the particular quality of light. She could hear voices. From downstairs. She went to the door. At the top of a staircase, she stopped. Below her, in a warm, well-lit kitchen that smelled of cardamom and butter, were 3 people. A man she didn't know. 2 children, a girl, perhaps 6, and a boy, maybe 8. And Mira. Her sister. Mira, who she hadn't spoken to in 2 years. Standing at the kitchen counter, laughing at something the older child had said, pouring coffee, completely at ease. Mira looked up and saw her. Priya, you finally awake? Come on, it's almost 9. She came downstairs. She sat at the kitchen table and was handed a cup of coffee and greeted by the man, Arjun, who was apparently Mira's husband, and by the 2 children, who were Mira's children, who called Priya auntie with the comfortable familiarity of people who did it all the time. She was in Mira's house. She had, apparently, spent the night here. Her overnight bag was in the guest room. Her phone, which she found in her bag, showed dozens of texts to Mira from the past several weeks. Warm, ordinary, the kind of texts she had not sent in 2 years. In this version of her life, she and Mira had made up. The fight, whatever it had been, had apparently been resolved. There were photos on Mira's fridge that included Priya. Family dinners she had no memory of attending. A birthday card from Mira's daughter, hand-drawn, that said thank you for my present Auntie Priya, spelled wrong in the way children spell things when they're earnest and very young. Priya sat at that kitchen table for 3 hours. She ate the cardamom rolls. She drank 2 cups of coffee. She watched her sister move around the kitchen with the ease of a woman who had built a good life and knew it. She listened to the children argue about something inconsequential and be arbitrated by their father. She said almost nothing. Mira noticed. Mira always noticed. After the children went to the living room, Mira sat across from her and said, "What's going on with you?" Priya looked at her sister. 2 years. 2 years of silence, of holding the shape of a fight she couldn't even fully describe anymore, of missing her sister at odd moments, at celebrations, at defeats, at ordinary Tuesdays. And here she was, just here, in a kitchen, drinking coffee. Priya said, "I just realized how much I missed you. Mira frowned slightly. We had dinner 3 weeks ago. I know, said Priya. It doesn't matter. I missed you. This version of the displacement is, in some ways, the most difficult to explain. Because unlike Marcus Webb, unlike Lena Hartwell, unlike Thomas Rourke, Priya Nair did not experience a dramatic rupture. She did not wake up in a profoundly foreign life. She woke up in a version of her life that was simply better. Same job, same city, same flat in Bethnal Green, she discovered when she went home that afternoon. Same cases on her desk, same salary, same colleagues. Except her relationship with her sister was healed. Except there were Sunday dinners, and nieces and nephews, and an Auntie Priya who was not theoretical but actual. She spent 3 weeks trying to figure out what had happened before she stopped trying. She wrote in her journal, March 12th, I have decided to stop looking for the seam. If there is a seam, a place where one version of my life meets another, I cannot find it. And if I'm honest with myself, I don't want to find it. The fight with Mira, in the version of reality I woke up from, on February 18th, was real. The silence was real. The loss was real. Whatever happened on the night of the 18th to 19th of February, I woke up on the other side of something I was not strong enough to fix myself. I'm not going to question it. I'm going to Mira's for dinner on Sunday. I'm going to help her daughter practice her spelling. And if I did not deserve this, if some other Priya earned this by being braver, by picking up the phone, by saying sorry first, then I am going to spend the rest of my life making sure her sacrifice was worth it. Priya Nair still works in law. She recently made partner. She is still very close with her sister. She never told anyone about February 19th until a friend showed her the Reddit thread about Marcus Webb, and she recognized, with a cold certainty, exactly what he was describing. Her comment on the thread received more upvotes than anything else. It said only, I know. Candle #story 5, Room 14. The account of Gary Holt, Las Vegas, Nevada, 2018. Not all displacements are gentle. Not all of them drop you into a warm kitchen with a cup of coffee and a second chance. Gary Holt's story is the one that keeps people up at night. Because Gary Holt woke up in someone else's nightmare. He was 48. A retired school bus driver from Sacramento. Divorced, 2 adult kids he saw twice a year, a small but sufficient retirement account, a pickup truck, and a habit of taking road trips alone when the quiet of his apartment became too loud. He had driven to Las Vegas for no particular reason on the night of July 20th, 2018. He checked into a motel off the strip, the kind of place with exterior corridors, ice machines, and a vending machine that was perpetually out of everything good. He'd paid cash. He'd asked for a non-smoking room. He was given room 14. He watched TV for a while, drank 1 beer from a gas station he'd stopped at on the way, and fell asleep before midnight. He woke up in the dark. The TV was off. The room was silent. And the smell was wrong. Not the chemical, industrial smell of motel cleaning products he'd fallen asleep to. Something else. Something warmer and more complicated. Cooking smells, sweat, something floral. The smell of a space that had been occupied by a person for a long time. He was in a bedroom. Small, cramped, the walls close. Posters on the walls that he could barely make out in the dark. Music posters, sports figures. The room of a teenager, he thought. He was in a bed against the wall, and through a thin curtain came the orange glow of a streetlight. He was wearing different clothes. Jeans, a t-shirt. Not his. He was thinner. He could feel it. His hands, when he held them up in the dark, were thinner than they should be, younger looking. Less lined. He was aware, all at once, of a sound from outside the room. Voices. Raised. A man and a woman, arguing in another room of what sounded like a small house. The argument was vicious, not theatrical, not the kind of argument that goes in circles and resolves. The kind that sounds like it's been going on for years and has long since moved past caring about resolution. The kind where things are said that cannot be taken back. Gary Holt lay very still and listened. The man's voice was threatening. Not in a general way. Specifically. Names, consequences, the geography of violence laid out plainly. The woman's voice was tired. Not scared, tired. Like someone who has stopped being afraid because fear requires hope, and hope requires a future, and she wasn't sure she had one of those. Gary got out of the bed. He caught his reflection in the dark glass of the window. He was young. Late teens, maybe 20. Lean. Dark hair he didn't have anymore. A face he didn't know that was, somehow, his face. He opened the bedroom door. The hallway of the house was small. A bathroom, another closed door, and ahead, light from a kitchen. The arguing was coming from in there. He walked to the kitchen doorway. A man and a woman. The man was large, florid-faced, standing too close to the woman in the way that isn't accidental. The woman, small, dark-haired, her arms crossed over herself in the particular posture of self-protection, turned when she heard Gary come in. Her face changed. "Javier," she said, "go back to your room." Javier. Gary was in the body of someone named Javier. In a house somewhere, he didn't know where, with a woman who was afraid, and a man who was the reason for the fear. He did not go back to his room. He stepped into the kitchen. The man looked at him. A long, appraising look. "Stay out of this, boy." Gary Holt was 48 years old. He had driven a school bus for 22 years. He had refereed more arguments between children, diffused more escalating situations, de-escalated more genuine crises than most people encounter in a lifetime. He looked at the man. He looked at the woman. He said, in a voice he said was not quite his own, "Not tonight." What happened next, Gary Holt has described differently at different times. He is not entirely sure what he did, operating as he was in a body he didn't know, in a situation he didn't understand, on instincts he didn't fully recognize as his. He stood his ground. He placed himself between the man and the woman. The man left. Not before things were said. Not before the particular ugliness of such a person was displayed fully. But he left. The woman, Javier's mother, Gary understood, stood in the kitchen after the door slammed, and shook. Just shook, her hands at her sides, as if the fear that had been held at bay was now flooding in. Then she looked at Gary, at Javier, and she said something in Spanish that he didn't fully understand. But he understood the tone. It was gratitude, and something underneath the gratitude, something like surprise. Like whatever Javier had done tonight was not what Javier usually did. Gary Holt woke up in room 14. Morning light under the curtain. The TV had come back on at some point. His phone said 8:17 a.m. He was himself. 48, retired, soft in the middle, his hands his own. He lay on the motel bed for a long time. He checked himself for evidence, anything that would prove what he'd experienced. He found nothing. No different clothing. No one else's memories. Nothing but the visceral, specific recollection of the kitchen, of the mother's face, of the feeling of standing in a body that fit differently than his own. He said, "I don't know if I was there. I don't know if Javier was real, or if his mother was real, or if anything I saw happened. I can't prove any of it. But I'll tell you what I know. I know that I stood between someone and something harmful. Even if it was a dream, even if none of it was real, I know that I didn't hesitate. I didn't go back to my room. And I've been thinking, ever since, about the version of me who would have. Who would have heard that argument through the wall and rolled over and gone back to sleep. And I'm very glad I'm not him. I hope Javier's mother is okay. Wherever she is. I hope Javier is too. Gary Holt drove home to Sacramento the next morning. He looked up Spanish classes when he got home. He has been taking them ever since. Candle Story 6, The Grieving Man, the account of Robert Calloway, Birmingham, Alabama, 2022. Robert Calloway's wife died on a Tuesday. Her name was Carol. They had been married for 31 years. She had blue eyes and a loud laugh and a collection of ceramic owls she kept on the windowsill and a habit of making up songs about mundane things. A song about looking for her keys, a song about traffic, a song about burning toast. She sang them to no tune in particular and thought they were funnier than they were, and Robert had loved that about her. She died of a stroke, suddenly, in a way that gave them no preparation and no goodbye. She was here, and then she was not. Robert was 63. He had worked for 30 years in insurance. He had grandchildren he adored. He was, by all accounts, a man of deep ordinariness and deep kindness, which are not the same thing and are both rarer than they sound. He did not handle the grief well. This is not a criticism. There is no correct way to handle grief. But Robert's grief was the engulfing kind. The kind that takes over every room of a person. That makes food tasteless and sleep impossible and mornings the most dangerous time because they require a person to get up and continue. And sometimes continuing seems like a joke the universe is playing on you. He had been a widower for 4 months when it happened. He woke up and heard her singing. The song was about the weather. A small, nonsensical song about the weather being rude for raining on a Wednesday. To no particular tune. Slightly off-key. Completely, unmistakably Carol. He lay in the bed without moving. He didn't want to move. He knew, with the particular cruelty of grief, that if he lay still long enough the sound might continue. That if he stayed in the space between sleeping and waking long enough, she would still be there. She came into the bedroom. She was carrying a cup of coffee. She was wearing the blue robe she'd had for years. The one he'd almost thrown away when he was cleaning out her things before he couldn't bear it anymore and put it back. She set the cup on his nightstand. "It's raining," she said. "Again. On a Wednesday, which is just rude." Robert Calloway said, he has told this story publicly, once, at a grief support group, with great difficulty, that he looked at his wife, who was dead, who had been dead for 4 months, who was standing in front of him warm and solid and carrying a cup of coffee. And he said nothing. He reached out and took the coffee. He said, "Yeah." He spent the day in that version of his life. She was alive. She was Carol. She remembered everything, the children, the grandchildren, the 31 years, the ceramic owls on the sill. When he touched her hand at the kitchen table, she was warm. When she laughed, that loud, particular laugh, it hit his chest the way it always had. He did not tell her what had happened to him, what world he'd come from. He simply spent the day with her. They took a walk, despite the rain. They ate lunch. She made the chicken soup she made when the weather turned cold, the soup she'd been making since their first apartment, the one with the barley that he'd never liked but had never told her. He ate it and didn't say a word. In the afternoon she fell asleep in the armchair, the way she did sometimes, with a book open on her lap. He sat across from her and watched her breathe for a long time. He fell asleep in his own chair. He woke up in the empty house. Her chair was empty. The book was not on the floor. The ceramic owls were on the sill, where he'd put them back. The cup on the nightstand was there. He looked at the cup for a long time. There was a small lipstick mark on the rim. Not his. Carol's color. A particular shade of mauve she'd worn for 20 years. He called his daughter that evening. He didn't tell her what had happened. he wouldn't do that for months. But he told her he was okay. He said, "I think I'm going to be okay." His daughter, who had been worrying about him for 4 months, started to cry. Robert Calloway told the grief support group, "I don't know what it was. I don't know if it was real. I've had people tell me it was a grief dream, a hallucination, a wish fulfillment so powerful my brain constructed it with full sensory detail. I'm not going to argue with any of that. But I want to say something to anyone who has lost someone. If it was a gift, if something gave me one last day with her, I did not waste it. I didn't spend it crying. I didn't spend it trying to explain. I just spent it with her. I ate the soup with the barley. If I get to see her again, wherever that is, she'll never know I didn't like it. And that's enough for me." He kept the coffee cup. He keeps it on the windowsill, next to the ceramic owls. Candle Story 7, The Last Stranger, the account of Nina Vasquez, Seattle, Washington, 2023. Nina Vasquez was 22 years old. She was a nursing student at the University of Washington. She was smart, tired in the particular way of medical students, and had recently decided, with the conviction of someone who had thought very hard about something and arrived at an answer they knew was right, that she was done with her program. Not taking a break. Not reconsidering. Done. She had made this decision on the evening of March 7, 2023. She had sat in her dorm room and thought it through carefully and concluded that she had chosen nursing for the wrong reasons. To please her family, to follow a track laid out before she was old enough to choose her own. And that continuing on that track would slowly hollow her out in a way she could feel beginning already. She was going to tell her parents in the morning. She went to sleep with the clarity of someone who has made a hard decision and is at peace with it. She woke up in a hospital. Not as a patient. At a nursing station. She was in scrubs. Her scrubs. She recognized them. The faded blue ones with the small bleach stain on the left cuff. A stethoscope around her neck. A badge clipped to her breast pocket that said Nina Vasquez, AUN. Around her, the controlled, particular chaos of a hospital floor. The beeping of monitors. The rolling of a medication cart. A colleague passing with a tray. Someone saying her name. Nina, bed 4 needs a check on her 4. She's been flagging it. Nina Vasquez, who had not yet finished nursing school, who had, 12 hours ago, decided to quit, walked to bed 4. The woman in bed 4 was elderly, anxious, and had pulled at her 4 line. Nina checked it. She knew how to check it. Her hands knew the motion before she'd consciously decided to make it. She said the right things to the patient. Calm, confident, specific things that she hadn't been taught yet but that came out of her mouth with the assurance of someone who had been doing this for years. She worked a full shift. She doesn't know how long exactly. Time moved strangely, compressed and then stretched. But she worked a full shift on a ward she didn't know. In a hospital she'd never been to. As a registered nurse she wasn't qualified to be. And she was good at it. She said, I knew things. Procedures, drug names, emergency protocols. Not all of it. I got to the edge of my knowledge a few times and had to improvise, and it scared me. But most of it, I just knew. Like it was already in there, waiting. The moment that stayed with her most was not a procedure or a medication or a clinical skill. It was near the end of the shift. An older man in a room at the end of the hall. He was terminal. She knew that. Somehow, the moment she walked in. He was alone. No visitors. The quiet of someone who had accepted what was coming. She sat with him for 11 minutes. She held his hand. She didn't say anything particularly important. She just stayed. When she stood to leave, he looked at her and said, Thank you, sweetheart. You're good at this. She woke up in her dorm room. Morning light. Her phone alarm going off. the speech to her parents still unwritten. She lay in the narrow dorm bed for a long time. She did not call her parents that day. She went to her clinical placement. She went the day after that. She finished her degree 14 months later. She is a registered nurse. She works at a hospital in Seattle. She was asked, by the friend who eventually heard the story and connected her with the others, with Marcus, with Lena, with Robert, whether she thought what happened to her was real. She said, "I think something showed me who I was going to be. And I think I needed to see it so I could choose it myself, instead of running from it. Whether that was a dream, or a vision, or something else, I don't know. I don't need to know. What I know is that I held a dying man's hand and he was grateful, and it mattered, and I was exactly where I was supposed to be. That's enough. That's enough." 7 strangers. 7 impossible mornings. 7 people who closed their eyes in one life and opened them in another, and had to decide, in the space of a heartbeat, who they were. The scientists will tell you about dissociation, about the brain's extraordinary capacity to construct reality, about fugue states and stress responses and the mechanisms by which a mind, under pressure, creates entire worlds to protect itself. And they may be right. But I want to ask you something. If you woke up tomorrow in a different life, a life where some old wound was healed, where someone you lost was still here, where you had chosen a different path, how would you know it wasn't real? How would you know that the life you're living right now is the original one? How would you know that somewhere, in some other city, in some other bed, in some other version of the long strange dream of being alive, someone else didn't wake up this morning wearing your face, finding your photos on their walls, feeding your cat, sleeping in your bed? Tonight, when you close your eyes, pay attention to where you wake up. This has been The Scary Collector. If these stories reached you, if one of them felt, in some way you can't explain, like yours, leave a comment below. Tell us your story. We're always listening. Don't forget to subscribe. Don't forget to share. And don't forget, the most terrifying thing about these stories isn't that they're impossible. It's that they're not.